What happens when a 70-year-old black man in a worn suit requests the presidential suite at America's most exclusive hotel? When Thomas Johnson is met with sneers and discrimination, no one suspects his true identity, or that the next 24 hours will transform everyone's lives forever. The gleaming, revolving doors of the Grand Palace Hotel parted silently as Thomas Johnson stepped into the opulent lobby. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, illuminating marble floors so polished they mirrored the world above. At 70 years old, Thomas carried himself with quiet dignity despite his simple, slightly worn suit, a stark contrast to the gold-trimmed furnishings and designer-clad guests that populated the most exclusive hotel in the city. As he crossed the vast expanse of the lobby, Thomas felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking his movement. Security guards straightened their postures, exchanging meaningful glances. The concierge's smile faltered. A bellhop who had been rushing forward to assist an arriving guest abruptly changed course. Thomas had expected this reception. Indeed, he had counted on it. Approaching the reception desk, he met the forced smile of a young woman whose name tag identified her as Vanessa. Her perfectly manicured fingers hovered over her keyboard as she assessed him with thinly veiled suspicion. "Good afternoon," Thomas said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a man who had spent decades being underestimated. "I'd like to reserve the presidential suite for tonight." Vanessa's eyebrows shot up, and she exchanged glances with her colleagues. A discreet laugh escaped her lips. "Sir, the presidential suite costs $25,000 per night. Perhaps you'd like something more suitable." The condescension dripping from the word suitable revealed all Thomas needed to know. "I'm fully capable of covering the cost," Thomas replied calmly. "I'd like to check availability, please." As Vanessa's smile hardened into annoyance, Thomas noticed a young black man at the far end of the reception desk watching the interaction with visible discomfort. Their eyes met briefly, a fleeting connection that spoke volumes in its silence. Thomas Johnson had come here with a purpose, and the first act of his carefully orchestrated plan was now in motion. Vanessa's irritation was palpable as she glanced toward a middle-aged man in an impeccably tailored suit who was approaching with measured steps. "Mr. Richards, this gentleman is insisting on the presidential suite," she said, her tone suggesting Thomas was demanding something ridiculous. Richard Stevens, the assistant manager, sized Thomas up with barely disguised contempt. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed the elderly man. "Sir, our luxury accommodations require advance reservation and credit verification. There's a more modest hotel 3 blocks from here that might better suit your needs." Thomas observed how Richard subtly signaled to a security guard who began moving closer, a clear message that his presence was unwelcome. This represented his first real obstacle, though hardly an unexpected one. "I can pay in advance, in cash," Thomas said, producing a thick bundle of high-denomination bills from his inner jacket pocket. Richard's eyes widened momentarily at the sight of the money before his expression hardened again. "I'm afraid our policy requires a premium credit card for the presidential suite, regardless of cash payment. It's a security matter." Thomas noted the young black employee at the reception desk was now watching the interaction intently, his discomfort even more evident. Nearby, an older black woman in a housekeeper's uniform was dusting a side table, her movements slowing as she took in the scene while keeping her head down. "I see," Thomas responded evenly. "And is this policy applied to all guests?" Before Richard could answer, the hotel's rotating doors spun again, admitting a well-dressed white couple dripping with designer accessories. The woman's diamond necklace caught the light from the chandeliers, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the marble floor. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, what a delightful surprise," Richard exclaimed, immediately abandoning Thomas to greet the newcomers with effusive warmth. "How was Paris?" "Divine as always, Richard," Mrs. Whitman replied. "We've just flown in on the private jet and we're exhausted. Is the presidential suite available? We know it's short notice." "For you?" "Always," Richard assured them with a broad smile. "We'll have you settled in right away." Thomas stood silently, observing as the stark contrast in treatment played out before him. The invisible barriers were being erected higher with each passing moment. "Hey there, fellow storytellers. I hope you're already feeling drawn into Thomas Johnson's powerful journey at the Grand Palace Hotel. Before we continue with this story of dignity and transformation, I'd love to know, have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where someone was judged unfairly based on appearances? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you're enjoying this narrative about standing up for what's right, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to join our community of people who believe in the power of stories to change hearts and minds. Now, let's get back to Thomas as he faces more challenges at the Grand Palace. "Excuse me," Thomas said as Richard finished arranging the Whitmans' accommodations. "I couldn't help but notice that the presidential suite is indeed available, contrary to what was implied." Richard turned to him with barely concealed annoyance. "These are regular clients, sir. Now, if there's nothing else we can help you with..." The dismissal was clear, but Thomas had anticipated this moment. His internal conflict, between revealing his true identity immediately or allowing events to unfold naturally, resolved in favor of patience. There was more to witness, more to understand about how this establishment operated. "I'll wait in the lobby until suitable accommodation becomes available," Thomas stated calmly, moving toward a plush armchair near the grand piano. Richard's jaw tightened. After ensuring the Whitmans were being properly attended to, he made his way to the security desk, whispering instructions to the head of security while gesturing discreetly toward Thomas. From his vantage point, Thomas observed the hotel's operations with the practiced eye of someone who had built an empire by noticing details others missed. The young black receptionist, whose name tag read Marcus, was being micromanaged by Vanessa, despite handling his tasks with obvious efficiency. The older housekeeper moved through the space virtually invisible to the guests, despite her critical role in maintaining the hotel's pristine appearance. Over the next hour, Thomas weathered a series of calculated indignities. Staff repeatedly approached to ask if he was lost or needed assistance finding his way out. The air conditioning vents above his seating area were cranked to uncomfortable levels. When he approached the lobby bar, servers studiously ignored him while attending promptly to other guests. Through it all, Thomas maintained his composure, jotting occasional notes in a small leather-bound notebook. His dignified resistance was itself becoming a form of silent protest, one that was beginning to attract notice from observant guests. The housekeeper, whose name badge read Celia Robinson, eventually approached his chair, ostensibly to dust the side table. "They're hoping you'll get uncomfortable enough to leave," she whispered, barely moving her lips. 25 years I've worked here, and they still call me by the wrong name half the time." Thomas nodded almost imperceptibly as she placed a cup of coffee on the table beside him. "Thank you, Ms. Robinson," he said, emphasizing her name with respectful recognition. The small act of kindness from Celia marked the beginning of alliances that would prove crucial in the hours to come. As afternoon faded into evening, the Grand Palace's lobby transformed. Crystal chandeliers dimmed to a warm glow, and soft jazz floated from the grand piano where a tuxedo-clad musician now played. Well-heeled guests drifted through in evening wear, many heading toward the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant. Thomas remained in his seat, a still point in the flowing current of luxury and privilege. His continued presence had become a source of growing anxiety for the staff. He noticed Richard in frequent hushed consultation with various department heads, all of them casting furtive glances in his direction. Finally, a distinguished man in his 50s approached Thomas with practiced charm. The silver name tag on his impeccable suit identified him as Gregory Phillips, Director of Operations. "Good evening, sir," Phillips began with false cordiality. "It seems there may have been some misunderstanding earlier. Perhaps I can assist you in finding alternative accommodation elsewhere? I'd be happy to call another establishment for you." Thomas set aside the newspaper he'd been reading. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Phillips. I'm simply waiting to be treated with the same respect afforded to any other potential guest." Phillips maintained his smile, though it grew strained. "We at the Grand Palace pride ourselves on treating all visitors with respect. However, we also have certain standards to maintain." "Standards?" Thomas echoed, his voice calm but penetrating. "I'd be interested to hear exactly what standards you're referring to." Phillips shifted uncomfortably, aware that several nearby guests were now listening to their exchange. I simply meant that our clientele expects a certain ambiance and experience. And my presence disrupts that ambiance in some way? The facade of politeness was wearing thin. Phillips leaned closer, lowering his voice. Sir, I'm trying to handle this discreetly. We both know this isn't the right place for you. I'm asking you politely to leave before we're forced to take more serious measures. The threat hung in the air between them, but Thomas remained unfazed. I believe I have as much right to be here as anyone else, he stated simply. Nearby, Marcus the receptionist was processing check-ins for new arrivals, but his attention kept drifting to the confrontation. Thomas could see the young man's internal struggle written across his face, the battle between self-preservation and moral indignation. As Phillips walked away, visibly frustrated, Thomas noticed him approach the head of security again. The situation was escalating precisely as he had anticipated. The evening wore on, and the lobby grew quieter as most guests had either retired to their rooms or departed for nighttime entertainment. Thomas remained in his seat, now reading a book he had pulled from his leather briefcase. To anyone observing, he appeared the picture of relaxed patience, though inwardly he was cataloging every interaction, every slight, every revealing moment. Marcus's shift was ending, and Thomas watched as the young man collected his belongings from behind the reception desk. Instead of heading directly to the staff exit, however, Marcus hesitated, then made an unexpected detour to Thomas's corner of the lobby. Sir, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They've called the police. Thomas looked up, meeting the young man's concerned gaze. Thank you for telling me. They're saying you're trespassing, Marcus continued, nervously glancing over his shoulder. I don't think it's right, what they're doing. What's your name? Thomas asked, though he had already noted it from the name tag. Marcus Taylor, sir. Why are you risking your position to warn me, Mr. Taylor? Marcus straightened slightly. My grandmother raised me to recognize when something isn't right. She always said, silence makes you complicit. He paused. I need this job for tuition, but some things matter more. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is, Marcus replied with the hint of a smile. Listen, when the officers arrive, ask for Officer Davis if he's on duty. He's fair. Before Thomas could respond, Marcus was called sharply by Richard, who had emerged from a back office. Taylor, a word, please. As Marcus reluctantly walked away, Celia appeared again, ostensibly to collect Thomas's empty coffee cup. He's a good boy, she murmured. Too good for this place. She hesitated before adding, There's a service entrance on the east side if you need to leave quickly. Thomas thanked her but shook his head slightly. I believe I'll stay right here, Miss Robinson. The unlikely allies, a struggling student and an overlooked housekeeper, had chosen to stand for principle over expediency. Their small acts of courage would not go unnoticed or unrewarded. 2 police officers entered the Grand Palace shortly after 9 o'clock, their arrival creating a ripple of curiosity among the remaining guests in the lobby. Richard Stevens hurried to intercept them, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing discreetly toward Thomas. Thomas quietly closed his book and returned it to his briefcase, then straightened his tie. He had faced far more intimidating situations than this one over the decades of building his business empire from nothing. The officers approached, one older and white, the other younger and black. It was the younger officer who addressed him first. Good evening, sir. I'm Officer Davis, and this is Officer Brennan. The hotel management has reported that you're refusing to leave the premises after being asked to do so. Is that correct? Thomas rose slowly to his feet, his dignity undiminished. Officer Davis, I entered this establishment as a potential customer seeking to rent the presidential suite. I was denied service while watching others receive immediate accommodation for the same request. I've been waiting peacefully, creating no disturbance. Officer Brennan frowned. Sir, regardless of the circumstances, this is private property. If management asks you to leave, you need to comply. I understand the law, officer, Thomas replied calmly. I also understand when I'm being discriminated against based on my appearance and the color of my skin. Richard interrupted, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's absolutely false. This has nothing to do with—" "Sir," Officer Davis cut him off, "please allow us to handle this." The younger officer studied Thomas's face more carefully, and a flicker of recognition crossed his features. He maintained his professional demeanor, however, as he continued addressing Thomas. "Sir, do you have identification with you?" Thomas reached slowly into his jacket and produced a wallet, from which he extracted not only his driver's license but also a business card that he handed specifically to Officer Davis. The officer glanced at the card and his eyes widened slightly before he composed his expression. By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone in the lobby, including a small group of journalists who had been covering a charity event in one of the hotel's ballrooms. One of them had discreetly begun recording the interaction on her phone. Phillips, the director of operations, hurried over with a concerned expression. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. This individual has been loitering for hours, making our guests uncomfortable." "Making them uncomfortable how, exactly?" Officer Davis asked. "Has he harassed anyone? Made threats? Damaged property?" "Well, no, but—" "Then what exactly is the issue?" Davis pressed. Phillips struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't explicitly reveal the discriminatory nature of their objections. "It's a matter of appropriate clientele," he finally managed. The tension in the lobby was palpable. Hotel staff had gathered in small clusters, watching nervously. Marcus, who should have left after his shift, lingered near the staff door, his expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. The standoff was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of a distinguished older white man who burst through the revolving doors with an entourage of assistants trailing behind him. His commanding presence drew all eyes immediately. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded, surveying the scene with obvious displeasure. Phillips blanched. "Mr. Thompson, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's board meeting." "Clearly," Thompson replied dryly before his gaze settled on Thomas. His expression transformed from irritation to shock. "Thomas Johnson." A hush fell over the lobby as Thompson, the chairman of the board for the entire hotel chain, strode across the marble floor to where Thomas stood with the police officers. "My God, what are you doing here? And why are the police involved?" Thompson asked, genuinely confused. Thomas extended his hand, which Thompson clasped warmly. "Hello, William. I decided to conduct a little unannounced inspection before tomorrow's official handover." The word handover hung in the air like a thunderclap. Thompson turned to the baffled hotel staff, his expression hardening. "Does someone want to explain why the new majority owner of Grand Palace Hotels International is being treated like an intruder?" The revelation hit like a tidal wave. Richard's face drained of color. Phillips seemed to physically shrink. Vanessa at the reception desk looked as though she might faint. "Owner?" Phillips stammered. "But we weren't informed of any ownership change." "It was finalized last week," Thompson explained tersely. "Mr. Johnson's acquisition of controlling interest was confidential until the formal announcement planned for tomorrow's board meeting." He turned back to Thomas. "Though I must say, this is an unorthodox way to inspect your new property." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the only way to truly see the character of an establishment is to experience it as an ordinary customer, particularly one who doesn't fit the expected profile." Officer Davis, who had recognized Thomas's name on the business card, addressed his partner. "I believe our services aren't needed here after all, Officer Brennan." As the police officers prepared to leave, Thomas called after them. "Officer Davis." When the young officer turned back, Thomas continued, "Thank you for your professionalism. Please give my regards to your mother. Gloria was one of the finest teachers at Lincoln High School when I was on the school board." Davis smiled. "I'll tell her you said so, Mr. Johnson. She speaks of you often." This personal connection added another layer to the unfolding drama, reinforcing Thomas's deep ties to the community that the hotel staff had so quickly dismissed. The lobby of the Grand Palace was transformed in the wake of the revelation. Where minutes before there had been tension and hostility, now there was a charged silence broken only by William Thompson's continued expressions of dismay and apology. "I assure you, Thomas, This is not how we train our staff to behave, Thompson insisted as they moved toward the manager's office for privacy. I'm mortified by what's happened. Thomas remained calm, his expression unreadable. Don't be too quick to apologize, William. What I've experienced today is valuable information about the true culture of this establishment. Behind them, the lobby burst into frantic activity. Richard and Phillips huddled with other managers, their faces pale and their gestures agitated. Vanessa appeared to be on the verge of tears as she explained something to her supervisor. Security guards who had been monitoring Thomas now stood awkwardly at their posts, uncertain how to proceed. In the manager's office, Thomas declined the seat offered to him. Before we continue, I'd like a few people to join us, he said. Of course, whoever you need, Thompson agreed quickly. Should I call the executive committee? No, Thomas replied. I'd like to speak with Marcus Taylor from reception and Celia Robinson from housekeeping. Thompson looked surprised but instructed his assistant to locate the employees immediately. While they waited, he attempted to salvage the situation. Thomas, I want you to know that whatever you experience today does not reflect our corporate values. We have diversity initiatives and… Thomas held up his hand. William, I've reviewed your corporate diversity reports. Impressive numbers on paper, but they don't capture the lived experience within your properties. That's what I came to understand firsthand. There was a tentative knock at the door, and Marcus and Celia entered, both looking apprehensive. Celia had removed her housekeeping apron but still wore the uniform. Marcus was in his street clothes, having clocked out earlier. Thank you for joining us, Thomas said warmly. Please, sit down. They hesitated, looking to Thompson for permission, which he hastily granted. Mr. Taylor, Ms. Robinson, Thomas began, I want to thank you both for the kindness and integrity you showed me today when you had no idea who I was. That speaks volumes about your character. Celia clutched her handbag tightly. Are we in trouble, sir? Quite the opposite, Thomas assured her. I'd like to hear from both of you about your experiences working here. The unvarnished truth, please. Marcus and Celia exchanged uncertain glances. You have my word that nothing you say will be held against you, Thomas promised. In fact, your honesty is extremely valuable to me right now. Slowly, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence, the two employees began to speak. They told of consistent patterns of discrimination in hiring and promotion, of the invisible hierarchies that kept employees of color in lower-paying, less visible positions regardless of their qualifications or tenure. Celia spoke of her 25 years of loyal service without a single promotion opportunity, while Marcus described the constant scrutiny and micromanagement he faced compared to his white counterparts. Thompson listened with growing dismay, occasionally attempting to interject with explanations or defenses, only to be silenced by a raised hand from Thomas. And this Richard Stevens, Thomas asked, has he been involved in hiring decisions? He's blocked every application I've put in for supervisor positions, Celia said quietly. Always find some reason why I'm not quite ready yet. By the time they finished speaking, Thompson's face had flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. I had no idea, he admitted. This is completely unacceptable. And yet it has been accepted, Thomas pointed out, for far too long. As word spread throughout the hotel about Thomas Johnson's true identity, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Staff members who had previously ignored or disdained him now hovered anxiously, offering assistance that ranged from sincere to sycophantic. Guests who had witnessed the earlier confrontation whispered among themselves, many of them surreptitiously taking photos or making phone calls. In the manager's office, Thomas had concluded his conversation with Marcus and Celia, thanking them for their candor and asking them to remain available for further discussion the following day. As they left, Phillips and Richard were summoned to take their place. The two men entered with visible trepidation. Richard, in particular, seemed to have aged years in the past hour, his former confidence replaced by naked fear. Gentlemen, Thomas began without preamble, I've spent the day observing how this hotel operates. I've experienced firsthand your approach to customer service, your treatment of staff, and your decision-making processes. To say I'm disappointed would be a profound understatement. Phillips attempted to salvage the situation. "Mr. Johnson, please allow me to express our deepest apologies for the misunderstanding earlier. Had we known your identity—" "That's precisely the problem," Thomas interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "You believe the issue is that you didn't recognize me as someone important. The real issue is that you've created a culture where people are judged not by their character or even their ability to pay, but by superficial attributes like skin color, age, or the cut of their clothing." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I assure you that race had nothing to do with—" "Stop," Thomas said simply. "Let's not add dishonesty to discrimination. I watched you turn me away while welcoming the Whitmans to the very suite you claimed was unavailable. I heard the language you used, the tone you adopted. More importantly, I've now heard from your staff about the systematic biases that permeate this institution." William Thompson, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "I've already informed Mr. Johnson that effective immediately, you're both suspended pending a full investigation." The two men paled. Phillips began to protest, but Thomas raised his hand for silence. "I'm not interested in performative actions or scapegoating," he said. "What happened today is a symptom of deeper issues that won't be solved by simply removing a few individuals. That said, your actions do have consequences." From his briefcase, Thomas withdrew a folder and opened it on the desk. "These are the preliminary findings from an independent audit of hiring, promotion, and guest service patterns across all Grand Palace properties that I commissioned before considering the acquisition. The data confirms what I experienced today: systemic biases that have created separate and unequal experiences for staff and guests based on race, age, and perceived socioeconomic status." He handed copies to Thompson and the two managers. "You'll find that the Grand Palace has the worst metrics in the entire chain. The question now is what we're going to do about it." By midnight, the Grand Palace lobby had returned to its normal state of quiet elegance, though whispers of the evening's dramatic events continued to circulate among the night's staff. Thomas Johnson had finally checked into the presidential suite, not as a guest, but as the new owner evaluating his property. Standing at the panoramic windows overlooking the city lights, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a childhood in the segregated South to becoming a billionaire entrepreneur, he had navigated countless barriers erected by prejudice and preconception. Tonight's experience, while painful, had only confirmed what he had suspected when the opportunity to acquire the hotel chain arose. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Celia Robinson standing nervously in the hallway, still in her uniform despite the late hour. "Ms. Robinson, please come in," he said, stepping aside to welcome her. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, Mr. Johnson," she said, remaining near the door. "I just wanted to thank you for what you did today. It means a lot to those of us who've been here for years with no voice." "You shouldn't thank me yet," Thomas replied with a gentle smile. "Real change takes more than one dramatic moment. It requires sustained effort and commitment." Celia nodded, then hesitantly reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, worn notebook. "I thought this might help with what comes next," she said, offering it to him. "I've kept notes for years about how things work here, who gets promoted and why, which guests receive preferential treatment, how complaints are handled differently depending on who makes them." Thomas accepted the notebook with reverence, recognizing it for what it was: years of careful observation by someone who had been rendered nearly invisible by the system she worked within. "This is incredibly valuable, Ms. Robinson," he said sincerely. "Would you be willing to be part of the team that helps reshape this hotel's culture?" Celia's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a housekeeper." "You're a keen observer with 25 years of institutional knowledge," Thomas corrected her, "and you've demonstrated the kind of integrity that can't be taught in management seminars." For the first time since he'd met her, Celia smiled fully. "Then yes, I'd be honored to help." After she left, Thomas began to read through her meticulous notes. The patterns she had documented matched perfectly with his own observations and the audit findings, creating a comprehensive picture of the dysfunctional culture that had taken root at the Grand Palace. Another knock came at his door around 1 a.m. This time it was Marcus Taylor, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. "Mr. Johnson, I hope I'm not disturbing you," he began. "Not at all, Mr. Taylor. Come in." "I couldn't sleep after everything that happened," Marcus explained. "I started thinking about solutions, real, practical changes that could transform how this place operates." He hesitated. "I wrote some ideas down, if you're interested." Thomas smiled warmly. "I'm very interested. That's exactly the kind of forward thinking we need." Marcus handed him several pages of neatly written notes. "It's not just about diversity training or hiring quotas," he explained as Thomas began to read. "It's about creating systems that ensure equity in every interaction, from hiring to promotions to guest services." Thomas nodded approvingly as he scanned the thoughtful proposals. "You have a mind for organizational design, Mr. Taylor. These are excellent suggestions." "I'm studying business management," Marcus admitted. "Working here has been like a case study in what not to do." "Sometimes negative examples teach us the most valuable lessons," Thomas observed. "Tell me, what are your career goals once you complete your degree?" As Marcus outlined his aspirations, Thomas recognized in the young man the same hunger for excellence and fairness that had driven his own success. Here were the seeds of transformation, not in glossy corporate diversity initiatives or public relations campaigns, but in the authentic voices of those who had experienced the system's failings firsthand. The first light of morning found Thomas already at work in the hotel's executive conference room, which he had commandeered as temporary headquarters. Around him, tables were covered with documents. Celia's notebook, Marcus's proposals, the audit reports, employee records, guest satisfaction surveys, and financial statements. William Thompson arrived at 7 a.m., looking haggard. "I was up most of the night reviewing those audit findings," he admitted, accepting the coffee Thomas offered. "I failed as chairman, Thomas. I should have seen what was happening." "It's easy to miss what you're not looking for," Thomas replied without absolving him of responsibility. "The question is, what will you do now that you know?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several executive team members, summoned for an emergency meeting. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility as they regarded the man who had disrupted their world. "Before we begin," Thomas announced once everyone was seated, "I want to be clear about something. I didn't orchestrate yesterday's events as some kind of gotcha moment or publicity stunt. I came here as an anonymous customer because I believe that how you treat someone when you think they're nobody reveals far more than how you treat someone when you know they're somebody." He moved to a whiteboard where he had listed key metrics from the audit. "These numbers tell a disturbing story about the Grand Palace. Staff turnover among people of color is triple the rate of white employees. Guest complaints from minority customers are twice as likely to be dismissed or downgraded. Promotion rates show clear racial disparities even when controlling for education and experience." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "But numbers only tell part of the story," Thomas continued. "What I experienced yesterday, what I saw and heard and felt, can't be fully captured in statistics." From the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, one day's subjective experience doesn't necessarily represent our overall operations." Thomas identified the speaker as James Holloway, the hotel's marketing director. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Holloway," he agreed, surprising everyone. "That's why I'm not relying solely on yesterday's experience." He gestured to the documents spread across the tables. "I'm looking at patterns documented over years by your own staff, feedback from countless guests, and independent data analysis. All of it points to the same conclusion. The Grand Palace has been operating with two distinct standards of service and opportunity, divided along lines of race and perceived status." As the executives absorbed this indictment, there was a knock at the conference room door. A junior staff member entered hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Johnson. There are news reporters in the lobby asking for comments about last night's incident. Apparently someone posted video online, and it's gone viral." Thompson groaned, but Thomas appeared unfazed. "Please tell them we'll issue a statement shortly," he instructed. Once the door closed again, he turned back to the group. This brings us to an important crossroads. We can treat this situation as a PR crisis to be managed and minimized, or we can recognize it as an opportunity for genuine transformation. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked the chief financial officer, eyeing Thomas warily. "I'm proposing that we acknowledge our failings honestly and commit publicly to specific, measurable changes," Thomas replied. "No vague promises or corporate doublespeak. Concrete actions with accountability mechanisms and transparent reporting. That could expose us to significant liability," the legal counsel warned. "And continuing as we have been won't," Thomas challenged. "The liability I'm concerned about isn't just legal. It's moral, ethical, and ultimately financial. Discrimination is bad business, plain and simple." For the next 2 hours, the room was filled with intense debate. Some executives resisted, arguing for a more cautious, incremental approach. Others, seeing which way the wind was blowing with the new owner, quickly aligned themselves with Thomas's vision. Through it all, Thomas remained steady, neither raising his voice nor backing down from his core principles. By mid-morning, a consensus began to emerge. Not from coercion, but from the gradual recognition that Thomas Johnson had not built his business empire by making reckless decisions. If he believed that bold transformation was both necessary and viable, perhaps they should listen. At noon, the Grand Palace lobby was filled to capacity. Hotel staff stood nervously alongside curious guests and a substantial media presence. The ornate space that had witnessed Thomas Johnson's humiliation just a day before now served as the stage for what many were already calling a watershed moment in the hospitality industry. Thomas stood at a podium flanked by William Thompson and, somewhat surprisingly to the assembled crowd, Celia Robinson and Marcus Taylor. The contrast was striking. The billionaire owner and corporate chairman alongside a housekeeper and a front desk clerk. "Yesterday," Thomas began, his voice steady and clear, "I arrived at this hotel as an anonymous guest seeking a room. What followed was a series of interactions that revealed deeply troubling patterns of discrimination and unequal treatment." He recounted the events dispassionately, without embellishment or accusation. "I could stand here today and tell you that what I experienced was an isolated incident or the actions of a few individuals who will be dealt with accordingly. That would be the easy path, and it would be false." A murmur ran through the crowd as cameras flashed. The truth is more challenging. What happened yesterday reflects systemic issues that have been allowed to flourish in the culture of this establishment. As the new majority owner of Grand Palace Hotels International, I take full responsibility for addressing these issues, starting today. Thomas outlined a comprehensive plan for transformation: mandatory bias training for all staff, revised hiring and promotion policies with transparent criteria, the creation of a diversity council with real authority, new complaint procedures for both staff and guests, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to monitor progress and hold management accountable. "But perhaps most importantly," he continued, "we're implementing a simple but powerful practice that I've used in all my businesses. Every quarter, members of executive management will experience our hotels as anonymous guests from diverse backgrounds. Not as a gotcha tactic, but as a genuine test of whether we're living up to our stated values." As Thomas spoke, he noticed Richard Stevens standing at the back of the lobby, his expression a complex mixture of resentment and uncertainty. Thomas had deliberately chosen not to fire him or Director Phillips immediately, despite pressure to do so. "Transformation isn't just about removing individuals who fail to meet our standards," Thomas explained as if addressing Richard directly. "It's about creating conditions where everyone has the opportunity to recognize their biases and grow beyond them." Some 1 week after the dramatic events at the Grand Palace, the hotel was operating under new interim management. William Thompson had taken personal charge of day-to-day operations, while a search committee, which included both Celia and Marcus, interviewed candidates for key leadership positions. Thomas Johnson had moved out of the presidential suite into a more modest room, from which he continued to observe the hotel's transformation. The changes were both subtle and profound. Staff members from all departments now participated in daily briefings, guest feedback was collected and reviewed without filtering, Promotion criteria had been made transparent and objective. On this particular morning, Thomas was surprised to receive a request for a meeting from Richard Stevens. After some consideration, he agreed to see the former assistant manager in the hotel's garden courtyard. Richard arrived precisely on time, the polish of his appearance somewhat diminished by the events of the past week. He sat stiffly across from Thomas, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Johnson," he began. "I've spent the past week reflecting on my actions and attitudes. I won't insult your intelligence by claiming I've had some miraculous overnight transformation, but I have recognized things about myself that I'm not proud of." Thomas listened without interruption, studying the man who had so dismissively tried to remove him from the lobby just days earlier. "The diversity training sessions have been eye-opening," Richard continued, "as has the experience of temporarily working under Celia's supervision in housekeeping operations." This had been part of Thomas's approach, having executives work in the departments they had previously overlooked or devalued. "And what have you learned from that experience?" Thomas asked. Richard hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That competence and dignity aren't tied to position or appearance, that I've been benefiting from advantages I didn't earn or even acknowledge, and that," he paused, his composure cracking slightly, "that I've caused real harm to people who deserved better." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Recognition is the first step, Mr. Stevens. The more difficult question is what you intend to do with that recognition." "That's why I wanted to speak with you," Richard replied. "I don't expect to return to my previous position. I understand why that's not possible, but I would like the opportunity to be part of the changes happening here, to help make this place what it should have been all along." "And why should I trust your sincerity?" Thomas asked directly. Richard reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper. "This is a letter I've written to every employee I've treated unfairly over the years, acknowledging specific instances and offering my genuine apology. It's not enough, I know that, but it's a start." The humility in this gesture struck Thomas. He had seen many corporate apologies over the years, carefully crafted by PR teams and legal departments to admit as little as possible. This was different. "Mr. Stevens, transformation isn't just about policies and procedures," Thomas said after a thoughtful pause. "It's about personal change, the hardest kind of all. I believe in second chances, but they must be earned through consistent actions, not just words." "I understand that," Richard agreed. "I'm prepared to do the work, however long it takes." As they concluded their conversation, Thomas reflected on the complex journey of change, not just for institutions but for individuals. Richard Stevens was neither a villain to be punished indefinitely nor a convert to be immediately trusted. He was, like most people, capable of both harm and growth. Later that day, Thomas met with Marcus Taylor to discuss the young man's expanded role in the hotel's operations. With Thomas's support, Marcus had been appointed to lead a new guest experience initiative focused on ensuring consistent, respectful service for all visitors. "How are you finding the new responsibilities?" Thomas asked as they walked through the lobby, which now hummed with a different energy. "Challenging, but rewarding," Marcus replied. "Some staff are resistant to change, but many are relieved to finally have permission to treat all guests with the same respect." "Permission?" Marcus nodded. Before, there was an unspoken expectation to treat different guests differently, to fawn over the wealthy and well-connected while just tolerating everyone else. Now, people can just be genuinely helpful to everyone. As they passed the reception desk, Thomas noted with satisfaction that the staff there now reflected the diversity of the city itself. Vanessa was still employed but had been reassigned after participating in intensive training. She had a long way to go in transforming her attitudes, but she was showing promising signs of change. "The real test will come when the changes are no longer new and exciting," Thomas observed. "That's when we'll see if we've truly shifted the culture or just created a temporary response to a crisis." Marcus smiled confidently. "By then, treating people with dignity will be the new normal. It's already happening. You can feel it." 3 months after Thomas Johnson's fateful visit to the Grand Palace, the hotel hosted a special event in its grand ballroom. The occasion was the official launch of the Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program being rolled out across all Grand Palace Hotel's international properties to ensure equitable treatment of all staff and guests. The ballroom was filled with an eclectic mix of people: hotel employees from all departments and levels, corporate executives, community leaders, diversity experts, and media representatives. Unlike traditional corporate events where hierarchy determined seating arrangements, here housekeepers sat alongside executives and front desk clerks alongside major investors. Thomas Johnson stood at the podium, surveying the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The past 3 months had seen significant changes throughout the hotel chain, some painful and difficult, others inspiring and invigorating. Progress had not been perfectly linear, but it had been real and measurable. "When I walked through the doors of this hotel 3 months ago," Thomas began, "I came face to face with biases that many people of color encounter daily. What happened next could have ended as just another viral moment of outrage in our digital age, a flash of attention followed by forgetting. Instead, it became the catalyst for meaningful change." He gestured to the diverse group seated at the head table: Celia Robinson, now the hotel's director of operations; Marcus Taylor, completing his degree while serving as guest experience manager; William Thompson, who had embraced the transformation with unexpected vigor; and even Richard Stevens, who was working his way back from the ground up, currently serving as a diversity liaison within the housekeeping department. "True change," Thomas continued, "is never about a single moment or a single person. It's about creating systems and cultures where dignity is the foundation of every interaction, where people are valued for their character and contributions rather than their appearance or background." From his pocket, Thomas withdrew a small, worn object, the leather key tag from the presidential suite that had been denied to him on that first day. "I keep this as a reminder that access and opportunity should never depend on how someone looks or what they wear, but on their inherent worth as human beings." As Thomas concluded his remarks, he introduced a surprise guest, Officer Davis, the young policeman who had recognized him during the confrontation. Davis had since been promoted and was now collaborating with the hotel chain on community outreach programs. "The ultimate measure of our success," Officer Davis told the audience, "won't be found in corporate reports or press releases. It will be in the daily experiences of every person who walks through these doors, whether they arrive in designer clothes or worn shoes, whether they come to clean rooms or to sleep in them." The event continued with testimonials from staff members whose careers had flourished under the new systems, guests who had noticed the change in atmosphere, and community partners who were working with the hotel on broader social initiatives. At the end of the evening, Thomas found himself standing once again in the lobby where his test of the hotel's character had begun. The space was physically unchanged, still gleaming with marble and crystal, but the atmosphere was transformed. Staff members engaged with all guests attentively, without the subtle coding of worth based on appearance or perceived status. Celia approached him, her new position reflected in her confident stride and the respectful acknowledgement she received from passing colleagues. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when you first sat in that chair over there and refused to leave, I never imagined where it would lead. For 25 years, I kept my head down and accepted things as they were because I needed the job. And now?" Thomas asked. "Now I realize that dignity isn't something that should be granted as a privilege. It's a right that belongs to everyone, and defending that right is worth the risk." As they stood there, an elderly black couple entered the hotel, dressed in simple but neat clothing. Thomas and Celia watched as they were greeted with genuine warmth by the reception staff, offered assistance with their bags, and escorted to the elevator with the same courtesy that would have been extended to any guest. No tests needed to be performed. No lessons needed to be taught. Simple human dignity had become the standard, not the exception. "That," Thomas said quietly to Celia, "is what success looks like." And as he prepared to depart for his next destination, another property in the chain where the transformation was still in its early stages, Thomas Johnson carried with him the conviction that had guided his life's work, that true wealth is measured not in dollars but in how we honor the inherent value in every human being. The Grand Palace had passed its test of character, not perfectly and not without struggle, but with a genuine commitment to change. In the end, that was all anyone could ask. I'm curious, what moment in this story resonated with you the most? Was it when Thomas maintained his composure despite discrimination? When Marcus or Celia took small but brave stands? Or perhaps the transformative ending where real change took root? Share your thoughts in the comments. This community is all about exploring powerful stories of transformation and human dignity. If you found value in today's narrative, I'd be honored if you'd join our storytelling family by subscribing. Each week, we share narratives that challenge perspectives and open hearts. Have you experienced a moment in your life where standing firm in your dignity changed a situation? Or a time when you witnessed the power of quiet strength? Your stories matter to this community, and we'd love to hear them in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with The Dignity Test. If there's one thing to take away, perhaps it's Thomas's understanding that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in how we honor the inherent value in every human being. Until our next story, remember that your presence here makes this community richer.